You ever watch an entire neighborhood go silent? I mean dead quiet. Just the sound of water lapping against the dock and a dozen people staring at me like I'd lost my mind. That's what it looked like the morning I tightened the last bolt on a 6-foot-tall wooden fence cutting straight through the middle of the lakefront. Half sand, half dock, half water. It didn't matter. I'd split that paradise in two, like a scalpel through a wound. On the other side, Karen Fitzgerald's cousin Margaret stood frozen, her fancy beach chairs and half-finished jet ski ramp now trapped behind a wall of lumber. I didn't say a word. I just stepped back, admired my work, and thought this is what happens when people push too far. My name's Mark Sullivan. I'm a contracts lawyer, not a builder, not a rebel. But that morning, I was both. I bought my house in Willowbrook Estates 5 years ago, drawn to its small lake, the kind of place where weekends felt like vacations. The deed came with shared lakefront rights, equal use of the beach and dock. My kids loved it. We'd fish at sunrise, swim until dusk, roast marshmallows by the water. It wasn't just property, it was part of who we were. Then 6 months ago, everything changed. Karen Fitzgerald became the new HOA president. Picture a woman who carries a clipboard like it's a weapon and speaks in citations instead of sentences. She came in smiling just here to improve the community, and within weeks she'd banned wind chimes, restricted flower colors, and started fining people for having non-regulation lawn edges. Her brother-in-law somehow became the HOA's paid landscape inspector. Her best friend took over the pool cleaning contract. It was nepotism dressed as community engagement. Still, I kept my head down. Until Margaret showed up, Karen's cousin from Florida, supposedly here for a short stay. Within a week, she'd turned the lakefront into her own resort. 2 loungers, a table with an umbrella, tiki torches, even a Bluetooth speaker blasting music loud enough to rattle windows. Then she brought in lumber. When I saw her and a few handymen building a private jet ski ramp right where my kids usually played, I decided to talk to her calmly. "Hey, Margaret, just so you know, the lakefront's shared access. We all use it." She gave me that look, the kind that says you're invisible. "Karen's already approved this," she said. "I have exclusive use rights now." She reassigned it since you're hardly ever here on weekdays. "Reassigned," I repeated, thinking I misheard. She waved a paper in my face. It looked official, HOA letterhead signatures, the works. Easement reassignment, it said. According to this, the HOA had voted unanimously to grant her exclusive rights to the west half of the lakefront for the better management of community resources. Unanimously funny, since 2 board members were out of state that month. I told her that, and she smirked. "Take it up with the board." I did. I called the county records office and the city planning department. They both confirmed what I already knew, that lakefront was deeded to specific lots, including mine, and no HOA could override that without my written consent. Karen's reassignment wasn't worth the paper it was printed on. At the next HOA meeting, I presented my findings. Karen sat at the podium like a queen addressing peasants. When I told her county law didn't recognize her reassignment, she went scarlet. "We've amended our bylaws," she snapped. "The HOA now has full control over all waterfront decisions. Any homeowner who challenges the board will be fined $500 per day." The room went quiet. I stared at her, almost laughing at the absurdity. "You can't fine people into giving up property rights, Karen. That's not how the law works." She leaned forward, eyes gleaming. "In Willowbrook Estates it does." That's when I knew I was dealing with someone who'd rather burn the whole place down than admit she was wrong. Over the next few weeks, Margaret expanded her lake resort. She held parties every weekend, loud music litter guests parking on other people's lawns. The final straw came one morning when my 8-year-old daughter went down to the water with her towel and goggles, only to come back in tears. Margaret had blocked her path, said, "Private property, sweetheart. You can't swim here anymore." That was it. Something inside me snapped. I spent the next few nights buried in paperwork, purchase agreements, property surveys, HOA charters, even decades-old meeting minutes. What I found was airtight. The HOA charter explicitly stated it had no authority over deeded lake access. Any attempt to restrict it would expose the board to personal liability. So I drafted a certified notice and sent it to both Karen and Margaret. They had 72 hours to clear their junk off the shared lakefront or face a lawsuit. 72 hours passed. Nothing changed. Instead, Karen showed up at my door with Margaret and a guy she introduced as their lawyer. He looked more like he'd learned law from courtroom dramas than any actual school. Karen crossed her arms. "Mark, let's be reasonable. I'll waive your HOA fees for a year if you just drop this." Margaret chimed in. "We can share the lakefront. I'll take Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays. You take the rest." The lawyer mumbled something about squatters' rights. I almost laughed. "Get off my porch," I said. They left and I started phase 2. I hired a licensed surveyor to mark the exact boundary lines. Turns out Margaret's setup didn't just violate shared access. It extended 10 feet onto my deeded property. Perfect. I took the report, filed permits for a fence, and went to the hardware store. The clerk looked up from his register and asked where I was putting it. When I told him across the middle of the lakefront, he blinked. "You're serious?" "Dead serious." Word spread faster than wildfire. By the next morning, half the neighborhood was whispering about it. And at sunrise, I was out there with a construction crew, posts, boards, and a mission. The first thud of the post driver echoed across the water. Every hit drew more spectators. By the time we reached the dock, a dozen people had gathered. And right on cue, Margaret stepped out onto her deck, coffee in hand, just in time to see her view vanish behind a growing wall of lumber. She screamed. The coffee mug shattered. Minutes later, Karen appeared in a bathrobe and curlers shouting, "This is vandalism. You're trespassing. You'll be fined for this." I held up my permits, the survey, and the city's approval. "No, Karen. This is property delineation. You know something you should have respected months ago." She called the police. They came, looked at my paperwork, shrugged, and left. She called city code enforcement. They inspected the fence and found no violations. She even called the mayor's office. Nothing worked. By afternoon, the fence stretched clean across the beach and into the shallow water, even slicing the community dock perfectly in half. It was practical, poetic, and completely legal. Margaret's setup was a wreck. Half her jet ski ramp was now useless. Her shade pavilion posts stood on both sides of the fence like broken legs. And the neighborhood, oh, they loved it. They tried not to show it, but I saw their smiles. For once, someone had stood up to Karen. That evening, Karen called an emergency HOA meeting. She plastered flyers calling me a menace and threat to community harmony. But when the meeting started, things didn't go the way she expected. Tom Harrison, a retired judge who'd lived here longer than anyone, stood first. Calm as ever, he laid out every legal violation Karen had committed: fraudulent easements, overreach of authority, misuse of HOA funds. Then Sarah Chen, who'd once been fined for her non-approved garden, presented her own evidence proof Karen had funneled money from the landscaping budget to her brother-in-law's fake business. Karen tried to shout over them, banging the gavel. "Order. I'm still president." Tom looked her dead in the eye. Not for long. Then Margaret's husband walked in. He'd just flown in from Chicago, unaware of the chaos. He took one look at the fence, at his furious wife, at the stack of legal documents spread on the table, and he snapped. "We're done. Pack your stuff, Margaret. We're leaving." You could hear a pin drop. Karen's last card came fast. She announced an executive order to have my fence torn down. But before she could finish, the HOA's actual attorney, someone she'd hired months ago, finally spoke. He stood, voice steady. "Madam President, you no longer have that authority. You've exposed this association to multiple liabilities. I strongly advise your immediate removal." The board voted on the spot. Unanimous. Karen was out. But it didn't end there. The new interim board launched an audit. What they found was worse than anyone imagined: falsified votes, fake invoices, and nearly $50,000 of HOA funds missing. All traced back to Karen. She was charged with fraud, embezzlement, and breach of fiduciary duty. 3 months later, a judge found her guilty. 2 years probation, 300 hours of community service, restitution of $47,000 to the HOA. When the gavel hit the bench, she broke down crying. And honestly, I didn't feel joy, just relief. Because I hadn't built that fence out of spite. I built it out of exhaustion, out of the need to prove that some people only understand boundaries when you draw them in wood and steel. These days I still sit by the lake some mornings, coffee in hand, watching the water ripple against the boards. The fence stands straight and solid, dividing what's mine from what's not. No more noise, no more arguments, no more power trips. And whenever someone asks why I did it, I just smile and say, some fences aren't built to divide people. They're built to remind them where respect ends.